Welcome to today's episode of This Old Church. In this episode, Dan Mowry will be outside with Inger Lamb of Prairie Landscapes, and they will be taking a look at our Prairie project that we have going on. And I will be meeting with Cathy McMullen, professor from Iowa State, and we will be looking at the importance of planting native Iowa trees and our contributions to the urban forest.
Hello, welcome to this episode of This Old Church. We're standing here with Inger Lamb of Prairie Landscapes, and frankly, the best thing I can do to let her passion show is to let her introduce herself a little bit more. Tell us about who you are, Inger, and what we're doing here and what's going to happen in the future.
Great, thanks. I'm happy to be here. They were asking me how I got started doing what I do, which is kind of urban prairie, using native plants on a small scale. I've always had a passion for plants from when I was young up until I got a PhD in plant sciences. But what really tipped me over the edge for native plants was I started volunteering when my son was 3, now he's 27, at Missouri Botanical Gardens, where they were doing a demonstration area for using native plants in the home garden. And I had been trying to grow dahlias in Missouri, which is not a good way to go. And when I realized you could just put a plant in the ground and let it go, and create habitat at the same time, I was sold. And ever since then, I've been a native plant and prairie person. So that, insert long story, but now I have this company where I go around and do native landscaping on small scales. I have people that have a garden the size of a bathtub, and I manage about 18 acres in another site that's actual prairie. So here at Plymouth Church, we're installing native landscaping. This will be an urban prairie garden. We have just gotten started late summer, so you can see a few things down at the bottom where we planted some things. We've also put seed down in this sod, which was killed ahead of time. Up in the top, you can see a few little plants coming up. Eventually, this will be habitat, which is one of the biggest benefits of putting in native plants. You're using plants that grew historically in central Iowa, carefully selected so we don't have the 9 feet tall plants in there, but we have a wide variety of species that are native here. And once they get established, the insects find them. Native insects just show up, so you get good insect populations, and then the birds come in that know the insects, and so you create habitat. And it's a lot more than just birds, of course. Eventually that's where we're going, and that's very much what drives me, is even on a small scale you can help the environment and help nature by putting native plants. You do, however, need to be patient. And so you saw our sign here, Prairie in Progress and Patience. That's because when you're growing something from a seed, it takes a long time for it to mature. The kind of phrase people use is the first year a prairie sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it leaps. So don't expect this to be, waving grain, next summer, because it won't be. There will be some stuff in there. For sure I have flowers in there that will come up and bloom quickly, but it'll be several years before we're established. We'll go through a very weedy phase where I'll have myself and people that work for me in here pulling weeds. There's pretty much nothing but manual labor. We'll get you over that hump, but once you get the natives established, they're very aggressive, they have deep roots, and the weed issues plummet. But for sure you need to keep on top of those the first year. This one is interesting in that we have very dry areas up at the top. So I have species that like to be, that would die if they had a lot of water. So some of them are native more to the Luss Hills in western Iowa. As you go down the slope at the bottom, water ponds down there when there's a lot of rain. We have this rockway that takes water out of this parking lot through this cut. They put rocks here so that we don't have erosion issues as it goes down the hill. And then at the bottom, then it can be pretty soggy. And so we have plants down there that will take that water. Additionally, though, they will also take drought. You can't have true wetland species down there because we will have a dry period, just like we did last summer. I think last summer was recorded as the 10th driest in the history of weather recording in Iowa. So that includes the Dust Bowl days. So it was dry. And we were watering down here then because established plants are okay, but getting established, they needed some water. So we're off and running. Like I say, we have some weedy months next season for us, but things will be up, and hopefully by the end of 2021 growing season, there will be much, much more to see here. Maybe we'll have another episode of This Old Church to show you our progress. And certainly by 2022, I expect this to be established native habitat.
So Inger, you've had some choices here. You're making decisions. Tell me about the plants and why you chose what you chose.
What plants? Well, one thing that can happen when people try to do native landscaping is they use any native plant. So everybody knows New England aster and big blue stem Indian grass, and those are all extremely tall plants, and we don't want a big floppy mess. There is a thing called a scary prairie, and we want to avoid that.
Right.
So I have selected plants that are shorter, hopefully with a skew towards more flowers than would have been here when this was historic prairie here, because people like flowers. It's attractive, and that helps the habitat anyway. And also that tolerate quite a bit of drought, because these slopes are pretty steep. Not much rain is going to soak into them when it rains. So I need things that can put up with sort of the surface of the moon from time to time. So I have little blue stem, which is a shorter, drier adapted grass. Blue grama, which is another grass that stays shorter. But I also have milkweeds. Everybody likes the monarch butterflies to come around, and when we're done, we'll have 6 or 7 species of milkweeds in here. Of course, orange butterfly weed that everybody knows, but there's also swamp milkweed, which doesn't really need a swamp, and so it'll be down at the bottom, and several others. The plants you can see already down at the bottom, the tufts that are on an even spacing that we actually planted earlier this summer. Many of those are sedges, which look like a grass if you're not a trained botanist, but they are actually in a different group. They're all carex species, and they like soggy, wet soils, which is what we have down there, and a few of them will take dry conditions, so these will take both. At the bottom, in a rainy spell, water actually ponds down there, but it'll get dry, like this summer, as I already said, the 10th driest summer on record since the 1800s. So it was very, very dry down there. So we need things that'll tolerate that range. So those are often what are used in a rain garden. This isn't, I don't know technically what a rain garden is, but this one doesn't really pond water very often. So, but those are the species we have in there. Up at the top, we have things that like to be very, very, very dry. So penstemon grandiflorus, large flowered penstemon. Whorled milkweed, which is a funny little thing. It looks like maybe a pine tree, but it is an actual milkweed. And a lot of other things in those same category.
I'm here with Cathy McMullen, and she is an expert on trees. And Cathy, where does your passion for trees come from?
I would say my parents took us to various state parks regularly when we were little, and we just spent time outdoors. We cooked hot dogs on a stick and that kind of thing. I just have always liked being outdoors. I've always liked bird watching. So maybe kind of roots in my childhood.
And so trees have been something with you ever since your youth and into your adulthood.
Yes.
And
yeah.
What is it that you do today professionally?
Professionally, I'm on the faculty at Iowa State in the Department of Natural Resource Ecology and Management, and I teach in the forestry program.
And you're very passionate about native Iowa trees.
I really would say I am an advocate for native Iowa trees and shrubs.
Yeah. And as we look around here, we see a stump from the recent derecho. But what we've done is we're attempting to revitalize our urban forest here. And Cathy, why don't you tell me a little bit about what we've got with these 4 small oaks I'm looking at here.
So the oaks, the mature oaks, for the most part, are probably approaching kind of the end of their lifespan. They can live, up to even 300 years. But as we saw during the derecho, a lot of the big old trees that came down were hollow, so they had lost a lot of their heartwood, which kind of indicates the end of the lifespan. And that's what would have happened naturally prior to European settlement. You have windstorms, ice storms. They would take out a certain number of trees, which then releases nutrients, opens up a light environment, so the next generation would come up in what we call forest canopy gaps. And so what we have here or trees, the next generation. They're about 20 years old. And people often are reluctant to plant oaks because there's a sort of assumption that they grow very slowly. However, in rich soils, especially, and in good sunlight, oaks can actually grow fairly fast in the first part of their life. So these 20-year-old oaks are already serving as good shade trees, as aesthetically
very
pleasing.
well established.
Very well established. Yeah, they look very healthy.
The other fear I hear a lot is oak wilt, and I think that a good way to avoid oak wilt, I guess some of the red oaks are more susceptible than the white oaks.
Red oaks are more susceptible. The red oak in particular, and as you were saying, one of the things to be very cautious about is when you trim the oaks, and you don't want to do it during the growing season. And so, yeah, I would say I have not seen a lot of oak wilt among the white oak group, but out in the woods you do see quite a bit with the red oaks.
Is there any particular species of tree that's hardier for Iowa? I know that during the 1960s we had the American elm that was a native tree, but then was infected by Dutch elm disease, and now we see the same thing kind of happening with the emerald ash borer and the ash trees, and we have plenty of native ash trees. What would you say to somebody that wanted to plant like an American elm or an ash tree?
I would probably advise against an ash tree at this point. However, I think Iowa State has planted a lot of elms, and I think that they've been able to breed some resistance into them. And so if you can find something like that, I would be in favor of planting elms. There's other species such as Kentucky coffee tree and yellow poplar or tulip poplar that make good urban trees. And of course the oaks, the hard maple that we planted in front of the church are all good choices.
And of course the question on my mind, and probably nobody else's, but what is your favorite tree?
It's hard to say. However, I really love eastern cottonwoods, and I would advocate for planting one here at the church. They're fast growing, they're beautiful, and one of the things I like about them is that they have flat petioles, and so the leaves, the wind catches them and they shimmer, and so the sound of a big old cottonwood shimmering in the wind is really lovely.
And could you explain to our viewers why we like to stick with native Iowa trees?
Well, one reason to stick with native Iowa trees is that they're adapted to our climate. So, for example, bur oak, which we planted over there, is very drought resistant. So they're able to withstand our cold winters, our droughts, and other kind of climate extremes that we have here. The other thing, especially the oaks, very important support for wildlife. So many species of mammals and birds use acorns as a staple food source. It's especially important in the wintertime when food is otherwise scarce. We were just talking about the form of oaks, and maples too are very valued as aesthetically. You know, maples because they turn the beautiful red in the fall. They have a nice kind of full canopy, kind of round canopy. Oaks don't give us the color, but if you look at an old, especially white or bur oak, will have very picturesque, what I call architecture, so limb structure. We have a resident red-tailed hawk, and they will perch on the towers and Plymouth Place, but also at the top of oaks,
right.
Big trees.
Speaking of the bur oak, in the wild, might actually have
Yes.
branches touching the ground.
Yeah, in fact, there's one on the Iowa State campus in front of Cat Hall where the branches do touch the ground. And trees also do what we call self-prune. As they get, as the lower branches get shaded, they will kind of die back on their own.
Right.
So yeah, like I said, I would consult with an arborist, but I wouldn't necessarily feel in a big rush to do anything.
Right. If you want to, we can take a walk and see
Where we've started to replant and be good stewards of our urban forest, and we have smaller oaks coming up where we've lost the 3 bigger ones that I talked about earlier.
Yes.
And as we come around here, we can see that we've got several small oaks that we've planted that are starting to take root and become adolescents. And look up here to my right with Roberto Sanchez, who's the backbone of this operation. And without him, we wouldn't have the beauty of the grounds that we have here, because he handles everything day to day. And we've worked together for quite a while. 17 años. 17 years we've worked here together. And before Roberto came here, and I was in charge of the lawn myself, for 3 years we had a number of dandelions and weeds, and people seem to like the place better when everything is pruned and weed free, like Roberto does. So I'd like to give thanks to Roberto, who is responsible for everything you see here when you drive by and don't notice those weeds and the unpruned bushes. That's because Roberto's been here for the last 17 years. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you.